For a long time, I was conditioned to believe that I had to chase things in order for them to come to me. I was taught to wait for results before changing my internal state. But something inside me never accepted this logic. Because even without external proof, there were moments when I felt whole. And in those moments, effortlessly, the universe seemed to bend, as if it responded not to what I said, but to what I did. I became convinced that there was a way to access that power within me, without always having to depend on what came from outside. That's when I discovered a powerful truth, and an uncomfortable one for those who still live on autopilot. You don't attract what you want. You attract what you are. And what you are depends on the emotion you can sustain, even if everything around you says otherwise. Pretending to have it, as long as it is with true emotion, is not an illusion. It is creation. It is like programming the body to recognize the future as the present, and thus rewrite your entire field of reality. Most people don't realize they're stuck in old emotional patterns, running invisible programs that only reinforce more of the same. But when you change the signal, when you simulate it with truth, feel it as if it were real, vibrate with coherence, the answer comes. Not like magic, but like pure physics. Because your body starts to react. Your brain reconfigures its routes. And the quantum field obediently responds without hesitation. This journey led me to discover that there is a point where thought, emotion, biology, and manifestation intertwine. A point where you no longer have to ask, because the universe already understands. A point where the future comes to you simply because you learn to feel before you see. And that's exactly where everything started to change. It took me a while to truly understand that my body couldn't tell the difference between what I was just imagining and what was actually happening. When I understood this, I realized how much my mind was conditioning my body to a past that no longer made sense. Every time I relived a limiting memory or thought, my brain sent the same chemical signals to my cells, and they obediently responded as if it were real. It was as if my body was stuck in an old movie, playing on loop. And unconsciously, I continued to act as the protagonist. That's when I started toying with the possibility of changing the script. Instead of identifying with memories of what I lacked, I decided to align myself with what I wanted to experience. I began to meditate on what it would be like to have abundance, health, true love, and not just thinking about those things, but living emotionally as if they were already real. I noticed my heart beating differently. My body warmed up. It was as if every cell was listening and believing the new command. Little by little, I noticed small changes in the way I felt on a daily basis. The science behind this fascinated me. The brain responds to mental images with the same circuitry that direct experience activates. In other words, if I repeated it enough, my body would begin to memorize this new state as the default. What had previously been intention became a chemical rehearsal of the reality I wanted to experience. My body began to rewire itself. My hormones changed, my breathing changed, the way I saw the world changed. What had previously been belief became embodied experience. I realized that the process was not about believe is to see, but feel to be. My cells were responding to what I was telling myself was true, even if it wasn't yet manifested on the physical plane. That was the key. The biology of belief works like a mirror of what you constantly feed yourself. What you accept as real, your body transforms into a state. And the state, over time, becomes an identity. What had previously been just an idea began to transform me from the inside. Now I understand why so many people live trapped in patterns they don't want. They believe they are what they suffered, and the body, a faithful executor, perpetuates the biochemistry of pain, scarcity, and insecurity. When I decided to break this chain, I had to insist on the new until it became familiar. And that's when something powerful starts to happen. When I started pretending that I already had the life I wanted, I confess that at first it seemed like just a mental game. But I gradually discovered that it wasn't the thought that changed everything, it was the emotion that accompanied it. It was as if my body was the instrument and the emotion was the melody. When the emotion was real, even if it was born from an imaginary scenario, my body reacted as if I were living it in the present. And the most impressive thing, my subconscious registered this state as real. I realized that my internal environment, what I felt on a continuous basis, was infinitely more powerful than any external circumstance. Even when I was surrounded by limitations, I could create an internal field of possibilities. By generating elevated emotions like gratitude, love, fulfillment, and holding them long enough, my subconscious mind began to absorb them as part of my new identity. It was as if I were sculpting a new me from the inside out. And my body responded chemically. It was almost immediate. My nervous system relaxed, my heart synchronized, even my immune system gave signs of reinforcement. I no longer had to wait for something to happen to feel it. I could feel it now. The truth is that the brain can't resist emotional repetition. When I repeated this practice, my subconscious accepted the new programming without resistance. It was like installing new software from within the emotional field, and not just the rational one. This is the point that many people miss. It's not just about imagining. Pretending without emotion is like trying to turn on a light bulb without power. True emotion, even if it's born from a mentally constructed scenario, is the fuel that carries the command to the energy field. And when this happens, the universe begins to mirror this vibrational state with events that resonate at the same frequency. It's not magic, it's pure coherence between what you feel and what you manifest. And over time, I realized that my external reality was simply responding to the coherence of my internal environment. I became lighter, more centered, more connected. And each time this happened, my confidence grew. The process stopped being an effort and became natural. It was as if I were reprogramming my own destiny with the invisible hands of true emotion. And from there, something even deeper began to unfold. It took me a while to understand that my genes were not definitive sentences, but dormant possibilities. Epigenetics showed me something that changed everything. It is the signals from the environment that determined which genes are activated or not. And the most powerful environment of all is the one I generate internally. When I began to change my emotional and mental frequency, I realized that I was activating biological patterns that were completely different from those that my past carried.
Embracing the frequency of my ideal self required more than positive thinking. It required embodying a new identity. And that identity had to be consistent in thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. I would wake up, and before I even opened my eyes, I would ask myself, how would my abundant self feel? And then I would breathe this state, feel this character inside me coming to life. I would let my body experience this new signature until it felt familiar. Over time, my body stopped resisting. It no longer wanted the old hormones of stress, doubt, and self-punishment. It craved this new emotional field that I was creating every day. And at that point, something began to change profoundly. I realized that I wasn't just changing my habits, I was transforming the expression of my DNA. It was as if my biology had been waiting for years for this new vibrational command to realign itself. I realized that it wasn't enough to want change, I had to become the change. When I began living the version of myself I wanted to be, even without proof in the external world, my body and mind began to cooperate with that version. My brain created new neural networks, my body produced new chemicals, and the frequency I was sending out into the quantum field was now a legitimate representation of the reality I was constructing, cell by cell. The truth is, when you step into the identity of your future self, you create the internal environment that your genes need to express something completely new. It was no longer about healing the past, it was about installing a new code. And every day that I persisted in this, more signs from the universe began to show me that this version was not only possible, it was already being registered in my energy field. And it was at this point that an even more powerful phenomenon began to emerge. When I realized that the brain was malleable, a piece fell into place within me. I wasn't stuck in the neural structure of my past. It was simply a reflection of the experiences I had repeated throughout my life. Neuroplasticity gave me freedom. It meant that I could rewire my brain by intentionally repeating new internal experiences. I didn't have to wait for reality to change. I could create the change within myself first. I began to rehearse my future every day, not like someone who dreams far away, but like someone who plays a role that has already been achieved. I visualized details, felt the scenarios, activated deep emotions, while my body responded as if everything were really happening. And the more I repeated this process, the more my brain accepted that state as real. The old synaptic connections began to weaken. New neural pathways emerged. It was like training an emotional and mental muscle. At first, there was resistance. My body tried to pull me back into old habits, into the familiar chemistry of scarcity or anxiety. But I persisted. I knew that each repetition was a new thread being woven into the map of my consciousness. And then, little by little, the emotions of the future began to become more familiar than the memories of the past. And that was a milestone in my transformation. This is the secret of deep reprogramming. The more you mentally experience what you want, the more your brain makes that experience automatic. I began to act, feel, and think according to this new identity effortlessly. It was as if the future me was already inhabiting me. The external world began to respond differently. Opportunities arose, signals multiplied, and all this because my internal system was already operating in a different pattern. The most powerful thing is to realize that this practice does not depend on time or external resources. It only depends on frequency and repetition. I understood that each time I activated this experience in the present, I was aligning myself with a future timeline where it was already real. And at that point, the distance between what I desired and what I was experiencing began to disappear. For a long time, I had been faithful to an old version of myself. It was sustained by memories, emotional patterns, and stories that seemed immutable. But the truth is that all of that past was just being reenacted day after day in my body. The chemistry of pain, scarcity, and lack of love was a biological routine that repeated itself like a habit. That's when I realized if I wanted to change my reality, I would have to simulate the future until it became stronger than my past. I started doing little experiments. I would wake up, and before anything else, I would put myself in the emotional state that I would like to live, even without any concrete reason. I faked gratitude, faked love, faked prosperity. At first, it felt artificial. But over time, my body began to accept that chemistry as real. And that was when the real transformation began. The body stopped asking for the old feelings. It started craving the new ones. Every time I felt what I wanted to live, even if it was pretended, something in my energy field adjusted. It was as if I was breaking with the emotional addiction of the past. I was no longer a hostage to circumstances. I was training myself to respond to the world with new emotions. And this naturally created new habits. My thoughts changed, my behaviors changed, and along with them, my destiny began to take another shape. This constant simulation became a kind of practice. Like a musician practicing a new melody until it becomes fluid, I was practicing the vibration of my new life every day. Even when external evidence said otherwise, I persisted in the practice, because I knew that the body needed repetition to accept the new as natural. And when it did, the universe began to respond, not with promises, but with synchronicities. There came a time when the past no longer had any power. I no longer needed to fight it, it simply ceased to be relevant. And the more I became rooted in this new frequency, the clearer it became that reality responded to my current energetic signature, not my history. And it was precisely in this state of simulation, become reality, that something extraordinary began to emerge. I was always told that I needed to achieve something in order to feel fulfilled. But over time, I realized that this logic was backwards. The universe doesn't respond to what I do, it responds to what I feel. And when I understood that emotion was a vibrational command, I began to treat my feelings as creative frequencies. Feeling before having became my starting point. I no longer waited to get emotional, I created the emotion as the seed of manifestation. Every time I sat in silence, closed my eyes, and put myself in the state of someone who had already achieved what they wanted, something profound happened. My heart beat differently, my body reacted with an unexplainable lightness. It was as if the quantum field was being activated by my vibration. I was no longer just visualizing, I was commanding reality with the coherent emotion of someone who has already lived it. That changed everything for me.
It was no longer about forcing myself. I no longer had to repeat 1,000 affirmations or desperately seek out signs. The practice was simple but powerful, feeling truthfully. And the more truthful the emotion, the more aligned my frequency became. I realized that the quantum field is extremely sensitive to coherence. It does not respond to empty words or unclear intentions. It responds to clear, consistent, emotionally charged vibrational states. I began to notice that after these practices, the coincidences increased. People appeared, situations aligned, doors opened. But I was no longer surprised, because I understood. These manifestations were just mirrors of what I had felt. I had already emitted the signal. The field was just returning with precision the frequency I was holding. It was not a miracle, nor was it luck. It was pure resonance between the internal and the external. And as I delved deeper into this process, I understood that the key was not in desire, but in the emotion that preceded it. It was as if the universe was always listening, but only responded to what felt true. And the more I anchored myself in this anticipatory feeling, the clearer it became that something beyond the mind was already organizing everything behind the scenes. There came a time when I began to understand that it wasn't just about what I thought or felt. It was about the vibration I was constantly carrying, almost like an invisible signature that the universe was reading. I learned that there was a field, a morphogenetic field, where all the information about me was being transmitted all the time. This field didn't respond to what I want, but to what I am energetically. And that made me take full responsibility for what I was emitting. The energetic identity I held was like a vibrational password. If I lived feeling inadequate, even though I desired prosperity, the field read scarcity. If I feigned confidence, but inside I vibrated doubt, the field returned confusion. Then I understood that faking it was not enough. It was necessary to feel coherently, as if that version was already registered within me. My field needed to be in full resonance with what I wanted to attract. I began to live as if I already was, and not for show or pretense, but because I knew that the field did not distinguish fantasy from identity. It merely reflected. If I vibrated as someone healthy, fulfilled, connected, that was what it replicated. The information I emitted, based on my continuous emotional frequency, organized my reality. There was no separation between what I felt and what I saw happening outside. This is where the game changes. The morphogenetic field is like a living matrix shaped by the vibrational repetitions I feed it. When I hold a new frequency long enough, this matrix begins to reorganize itself. The people around me change, opportunities realign, and even my body begins to respond differently. Because now, my energy no longer belongs to the old me. It pulsates to a new identity. This awareness brought me a silent responsibility, because I knew that it was no use just wishing it. I needed to embody it. I needed to live the now as if the future were already present and vibrate this with such coherence that the field had no other option but to mirror it. And it was exactly at this point that the world around me began to act as a reflection of what I had already become. It was when I began studying the relationship between consciousness and biology that everything fell into place. What I thought not just influenced my feelings, it literally altered the behavior of my cells. My DNA wasn't a fixed manual. It was responsive, adaptable, like an antenna that picked up instructions from the conscious and unconscious mind. And the more consistent the thought was with the emotion, the clearer the message it received. I understood that by simulating a reality with true feeling, I was not only modifying my vibrational frequency, I was also giving commands to my own genetic code. The mind sends the signal, the body translates it. Proteins are molded, gene expression changes, and when this happens, what was just an idea becomes form. It was at this point that the phrase reality is an extension of consciousness stopped being abstract and became the foundation of my life. It was almost as if each emotionally charged thought was an invisible architect shaping the world around me. I no longer had to wait for external changes to occur before I could feel something different. Now I was the source. And that source emanated from a place of deep alignment between what I believed, what I felt, and who I was becoming. Manifestation then ceased to be a pursuit and became a natural consequence of that state of being. With this understanding, my practice changed. I stopped trying to manifest and started allowing my body to believe. With each meditation, with each conscious breath, I reinforced the new signal to my DNA, and it responded. My body began to ask for new behaviors. My habits changed effortlessly. It was as if the whole system had reconfigured itself based on the new information I was sending out each day. And when this process becomes your new normal, you realize that the world around you has no choice but to shape itself according to who you are, not with what you ask for, nor with what you expect, but with what you vibrate continuously, biologically, emotionally, and energetically. Because, in the end, everything that exists out there was already encoded within you. If there is one sentence that sums up everything I experienced in this process, it is this: feel before you have, and the universe will have no choice but to deliver. That's what transformed my mind, my body, and my reality. Over time, I realized that it's not about effort or struggle. It's about frequency, coherence, and emotional truth. Whatever you are inside, sooner or later, becomes form in the world outside. So keep practicing, even if the external world doesn't reflect it yet, because the field has already received the signal. The reprogramming has already begun, and what seemed distant is already on its way. Now, with all this in motion, the only thing left is to stay in that state, because that is where the magic stays alive.